Councilman Charles shaved to be here. Appreciate that extra step this morning. Warms my heart. Charles came to see me. Well, it's good to see everybody out for our October Tuesday talk. A couple of quick announcements before we get started. We do have a bonus Tuesday talk this month, 2 weeks from today, on October 22nd. We'll have John Cavendish, who's going to be speaking about the Hawks Nest Tunnel, the construction of it, and his father was one of the chief engineers on the tunnel, so he has documents, original documents, and plans and designs from that. So that's going to be a really interesting talk, and we're excited to be able to do that bonus one. We get to throw in a bonus one every once in a while, and that's going to be a great lead into our day trip on the 24th, where we're going to go to Hawks Nest State Park, and we'll have lunch, can ride the tram down to the river, and then we'll be traveling to the Hawks Nest Memorial Cemetery, where we'll be met by a lady who has worked very hard to have that cemetery reestablished and dedicated to the memory of the workers, many of whom died quite tragically from the silicosis from the mine dig. And then also we're hoping that the fall leaves are quite beautiful. That's when they're supposed to be at peak, but who knows? We'll see. We do still have space on that trip. We're taking 2 vans this time. We are expanding this day trip thing. I had to recruit a second driver, but fortunately I have friends on campus and I can con them into doing things for me sometimes. And so we have a second van, and we do still have 9 seats available to go on the trip, and you can take the tram down to the river, or if you don't like those aerial tram things and you don't want to ride the tram, we have an option for that, and there's a cost differential. If you're not going to ride the tram, it's a little bit less, but it does include your lunch and transportation, as always with our day trips. And then we've got some, we're going to close out the year with some more great Tuesday talks, and I'll be sending out a survey by email sometime before the end of the year to get some feedback on our Tuesday talks and our classes and our day trips, and also get any wishes or ideas that you have for next year's programming. I already have 3 of our Tuesday talks for next year penciled in, but that means we still have 9 more to schedule for next year, and of course we can always add in as many bonus ones as we can find people to come talk. So that's what we have on tap for today. I was really excited. Word about our program is getting out because people are starting to contact me about coming to do the Tuesday talks, and Joy is an example of that. I got an email from Joy Adkins from the Kentucky Organ Donor Affiliates, and she said, I'd love to come talk to your group. And I was so thrilled when she did, because I know a couple of my friends who have had life-saving organ transplants. One who I went to college with who had a heart transplant, and then a gentleman that I went to church with when I lived in Indiana, who had lung damage from his military service in the Middle East and had a double lung transplant about 3 years ago. And then just about a year ago, I had a friend who died while waiting on the transplant list. So it's a topic that's kind of special to my heart, because I've really seen in the lives of people that I know and care about the importance of organ donation, and we need more people to be signing up to be donors, and I think Joy's going to share with us and help dispel some of the myths that sometimes keep people from signing up to do it. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn over the program to Joy Adkins.
Thank you, Beth. Hi, everybody. Beth, since you didn't speak with a mic, I'm going to follow suit if that's okay. I can usually project pretty well.
If at any point somebody can't hear, just start waving.
Okay. I'm Joy Adkins, as she said. I work in community outreach with an organization called CODA. Our name is Kentucky Organ Donor Affiliates, but we also work in West Virginia. We cover Cabell and Wayne counties, so that's why we have a satellite office here in Huntington. Our mission is to save lives through organ donation and to enhance lives through tissue donation. So our territory has been set out by the federal government. We cut for most of the state of Kentucky, a few counties in southern Indiana, and also Cabell and Wayne counties in West Virginia. We have these two counties because we're on the western edge of Kentucky, as you know, but also we have 2 trauma hospitals here. So typically in the case where a person does die of brain death and is in a hospital setting on a ventilator, they're typically at a trauma hospital where there's enhanced training for the personnel to help to save lives as best as possible and the most updated equipment. So I try to, she mentioned Kentucky organ donor affiliate, so I just want you all to know we also stick up for West Virginia. We have the 2 counties here. In my Huntington office, I work with 4 other people, 3 of whom are critical care nurses. So they cover, all the hospitals in eastern Kentucky and also here in Huntington, and work with the hospital staff in the case where a person might die of brain death and be a potential organ donor. I also work with a hospital development specialist named Trish Saccone, and luckily a few years ago, her husband had a heart transplant on their 33rd wedding anniversary. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was just the most wonderful and unique coincidence, and as a result of her husband regaining a second chance at life from that transplant and her learning so much about it, she developed a passion for the mission, and she's now working for CODA as well. So we actually have a lot of people at CODA who've been somehow touched by the mission, either a tissue recipient or donor mothers or just different connections. I'm just curious, how many of you know someone who had a transplant or who had a tissue transplant, who are on the waiting list, or who are a member of a donor family? Raise your hand if you know someone in any of those categories. So, you might not have been touched personally by this mission, but we all typically know someone who's been affected. So, I wanted to let you know that millions of us have signed up on donor registries in the states across the country as potential organ donors. I did that when I was 16. I just got my license. It made sense to me to do that, just in case something were to ever happen to me. I knew that I couldn't use my life-saving organs after my passing if they were still useful for someone else, so I signed up. But the chances of me being an organ donor when I die someday are 1 to 2%. That's because that's the percentage of people who die of brain death, that this particular way of passing, where there's been a loss of blood and oxygen in the brain, and the brain no longer has its food supply, so it suffers brain death. But if the person's on a ventilator in the hospital, where they're trying to save them, I'm not talking long-term ventilator support, not talking about that, but just, if there's an accident, for example, the person suffers a head injury, they're taken to the hospital, and they, are having trouble breathing, they put them on a ventilator, and they're doing everything they can to save them, but if the person can't withstand their injuries, they may suffer brain death if there's a loss of blood and oxygen to the brain. So only 1 to 2% of all the people who die in the United States can actually are eligible to be an organ donor based on that criteria. So that's why we just encourage everyone to sign up on their state's donor registries. Doing that is pretty much saying, if I could, I would help someone else after my death, if I were ever eligible. So anyway, that's kind of the setup for all this. Also, in the middle of my presentation, we're going to hear from one of my best volunteers, Joy Bryan-Harris. She's a liver recipient, and she's going to explain her personal journey with this mission. And then I'll finish up and talk about some of the myths related to this topic, like Beth mentioned. Also, afterward, if you want to come up and look at this donor family memorial quilt that I've set up, we have 15 of these quilts at CODA, and each of these quilt squares represents someone who's saved a life as an organ donor or enhanced a life as a tissue donor, or perhaps both. These are people from Kentucky and West Virginia, and the families of these donors made the quilt squares in honor of them. And we have a donor mother in Mount Sterling, Kentucky, who's a quilter and puts all the quilts together. So hopefully you sit down at a seat where there's a brochure and a pen, and also afterward, if you'd like to come over and get an Emery board that has the Donate Life logo on it, you can do that as well. We always need an Emery board for those fingernail snacks. So anyway, thank you for showing up today, and we'll go ahead and progress with the program. As I mentioned, CODA is the name of my organization. CODA is one of 58 organ procurement organizations across the country. We work with the healthcare arm of the federal government, and the federal government sets out our territory, which is typically based on where trauma hospitals are in relation to transplant centers. In Kentucky, there are 3 full transplant centers, one in Lexington at UK, 2 in Louisville, and one of those is a child-specific transplant center. And in West Virginia, there's no full transplant center. We do have Charleston Area Medical Center, where they have a good kidney program. They do living kidney donation there, and deceased kidney donation. In Morgantown, they're working with authorities to try to establish a heart and liver transplant program. So perhaps in the near future, West Virginia will have more transplant options. But and the good news is, all around West Virginia, there's transplant centers that people seek out care with. There's a wonderful care in Pittsburgh, Columbus, Cincinnati, just different locations. So signing up as a potential organ donor is basically saying, if I were able, I would be willing to give someone else a second chance at life. As you know, when you renew your driver's license at the DMV, or get your license for the first time, or perhaps seek out a state ID, you're asked the question about would you like to join the West Virginia Donor Registry. If you do that, this little symbol, it's called the Canusa symbol, and it's a medical symbol that appears ever so faintly just to the left of your photo on your license. So it used to say organ donor on the back of the license, but now they're just putting this little red symbol to the left of the photo, and sometimes you have to look real hard for it, but that's the indicator on the license in West Virginia currently. In Kentucky, there's a heart symbol. So why is there the need for more people to sign up as potential organ donors? Currently, there are more than 113,000 people on the National Transplant Waiting List. These are people that can't go to the hospital to have a procedure that's going to extend their lives for the long term. They can't go to the pharmacy to get a prescription that's going to help them. The only thing that's going to save their lives is a life-saving transplant, because one of their vital organs is about to fail. Of that big number, about 500 people are on the transplant list who live in West Virginia, and about 1,000 in Kentucky. And by the end of the day, more than 22 people will die nationally because an organ did not become available to save their lives. It's estimated that every 10 minutes or so, another person's added to the transplant waiting list. Of this huge number, the vast majority of those people need a kidney. And when I first learned this, I wondered, well, why is that? Why are the kidneys so the most needed organ? And I found out from my colleagues that there is a huge problem in the United States, as you probably know, with diabetes and high blood pressure. And both of those conditions can, if left untreated or in different combinations, can have a negative effect on the kidneys. So that seems to be why there's such a need for kidney transplants. So of that 113,000 people, about 85% of them need a kidney transplant. Also, all those people couldn't find a seat in the stadium where the Super Bowl is held each year. So if you've ever, if you're a sports fan, or if you've been in the room where the Super Bowl's on, that's a huge stadium, lots of seats there, and all those people couldn't find the seats. So it is a huge healthcare crisis in our country. So joining a registry gives hope. As I mentioned earlier, millions of people have signed up, but only 1% to 2% of us who die can actually be a donor based on how we pass. And that criteria of having died of brain death and being on a ventilator is the primary criteria that's used with organ donation. I mentioned that earlier that West Virginia has a living kidney donor program in Charleston. That's a wonderful option for people who need a kidney transplant. We are all typically born with 2 healthy working kidneys, but we can live with just one. So each year about 6,000 people decide to donate one of their kidneys to someone they know and love, typically, and to help them feel better more quickly and get off the transplant waiting list. I knew a man who was a part of our Tri-State Transplant Support and Volunteer Group in Huntington. His name was Kim Barrett. He sadly passed of injuries from a fall, but he one year decided to, just as a random good deed, to give one of his kidneys to whomever it matched with. And that was a very generous act, we thought, and we were all amazed with his willingness to do that. And it matched with a woman around the Pittsburgh area, and he met her a year or so after her transplant, and it was just a neat thing that he did. There's also a young man in Huntington named Aaron Priest. He has sight issues. The disease he has caused him to be partially blind. And after a few years, the disease that he had started to affect his kidneys as well. And his family was just determined that he wasn't going to have to, suffer any more difficulties due to that. So they all got tested to see who could be one of his the best living kidney donor for him. And his Aunt Marcia in Columbus was the best by the tissue typing and the blood typing. And they had their surgeries in Lexington at UK a few years ago in April, which happens to be National Donate Life Month. And Aaron's doing great, so this is an example of success through living kidney donation. By the way, anybody who would consider being a living kidney donor has to go through extensive medical testing themselves because, the physicians wouldn't want somebody to give up one of their kidneys if it was essential to their own health, or so anyone with like major, health issues wouldn't be allowed to be a living kidney donor due to their own, looking out for themselves. But they do the proper testing to determine if a person is a candidate for living kidney donation. And by the way, as I go through this information, if you have any questions, be sure to raise your hand and I'll be happy to try and answer your question. So the what ifs. I always encourage people to think about, this topic of organ and tissue donation, not just from the side of, do I want to sign up as a potential donor on my driver's license, but think about it from the flip side. What if it were you on the waiting list who needed a heart transplant or a liver transplant, within the next few months to live? What if it was your child or your grandchild? So I just encourage people to consider if it was someone you loved or yourself, what would you want to do? It's not a hard choice. You probably hope and pray that a life-saving organ would become available in time so that you or your loved one would receive the gift of life and have more years to live. The best way to convey one's wishes about organ donation is to join the organ donor registry in your state. I've got the websites up here for West Virginia and Kentucky, and also the websites in your brochure as well at your seat. And obviously the DMV is the original option, so you may have chosen to do that already at the DMV. But no matter what your choices, be sure to discuss this topic with your family and let them know that you have signed up as a potential organ donor, and if you were ever eligible, you would be willing to help save lives and give someone else a second chance. So at this point is when I'm going to introduce my guest speaker within the main speaker here. This is Joy Bryant Harris. She is one of my best volunteers, and she's currently going on 15 years with her transplant, and she's here to tell you all about it. Come on up.
Thank you, Joy.
You're welcome. Okay.
Well, as she said, my name is Joy Bryant Harris, and in February it will be 15 years that I received a new lease on life. I didn't even really know at that time how close I was to dying. But she was giving me the statistics, and everybody needs to know the statistics. But I want to give you the personal part of organ donation. And I will tell you, I'm doing the cardinal sin here today in giving a speech because I'm not using notes, but I've told this story so many times. And as you will find out, all recipients have a story. It's just mine is unique to me. I had a disease called PBC, primary biliary cirrhosis. It's now called primary biliary cholangitis. They changed the name of it a couple years ago. People didn't like that cirrhosis name connected with it. So they did change, which there was a connection anyway, and they could do that without any problem. But they found it early on. It's an autoimmune disease, primarily with autoimmune diseases. It attacks women. Men can get this disease, but women, middle-aged, usually, and I was about 45 when I found out I had PBC. And it's a disease that attacks the bile ducts in the liver, and nothing else at that point is affected. But as it progresses, and it's a slow progressing disease, then it can, and most usually, turns into cirrhosis. Now, a lot of people still, when they hear liver disease, it's like, oh wow, she's a closet drinker. She has that bottle in somewhere. But there are over 25 diseases of the liver. And yes, alcohol is one of those that can destroy your liver. But most of the time, those liver diseases weren't caused that way. And I have met many through my experiences hanging out at the hospitals and hanging out in clinics. I've met many recipients. And I have met very few that from being an alcoholic and having liver disease have they been able to get a new liver. They have to be certified that they have been sober for a certain period of time. And different OPOs have different criteria for that, some 6 months, some's a year. But I had this wonderful little disease, and I had absolutely no symptoms to begin with. But as it progressed, different things happened. I really lost all this weight. And by the way, that's something that you can ask me anything. My life's an open book, and you may look at my transplant book later if you have time. But I will tell you that I'm just one that is not a secretive person. And I will tell you most anything you ask, except we don't discuss my weight. But I will tell you that since birth I have gained 128.3 pounds. But I had lost an extensive amount of weight. And people are happy. No one goes up to them and says, yeah, you're really fat and you need to lose weight. But I had people that would come up to me, oh, Joy, you just look so bad. Well, you need to quit dieting. I wasn't dieting. I was dying. But I always had the attitude that I would not dwell on dying that day. Because if I did, I had given that day up and was not living that day. I knew, whatever happened, I knew that the Lord was going to take care of me. I knew that. But I needed a liver. The main reason I needed a liver for me wasn't for me to stay alive. You know, Paul said to live, well, to die is but gain. And that's the way I felt about it. But my children needed a mother. I had lost my husband. And in fact, yesterday was the 17th anniversary of my husband being in an explosion. He lived 10 days. And at the same time, 4 days earlier, I had a granddaughter that had been born at 32 weeks, and she was in the NICU. So I have my husband in the burn unit, and I have a granddaughter in the NICU. And then my husband, they shipped off to BAMSI, Brooke Army Medical Center, and he lived 10 days. So I lost my husband. My granddaughter was beautiful, and she made it. We have one picture of my husband, body isolate. 5 months later, my mother and dad have a car accident. We thought we were losing my mother. And 2 months later, we lost my dad. And my kids were very close to my dad. I was sick. I needed a transplant. But it was more for my kids because they couldn't lose anyone else. In fact, I was in Pittsburgh, and the day after I got out of ICU, my mother died. Didn't even get to attend the funeral. But God had purpose for me. God had a reason. Not just for my kids, which I believed. In fact, I dealt with my recovery as a job. I had a job to do. I had to get better because I had kids. I had grandkids. They didn't need to lose anyone else in their lives. But God was gracious. And by the way, he brought a wonderful gentleman into my life that I did marry. I knew he was a keeper. I had known him years before. He knew my first husband. But he lived out of town, and he came to town. And we went to lunch, and then he stayed for the weekend. And he said, let's go for a walk by the river, and we did. And we sat down, and really sweet, really nice, older gentleman. But he said, I'd marry you tomorrow if you marry me. I said, oh, whoa, just a minute. But then he said, well, I told him, I said, I have two things that I need to tell you. First off, I'm high maintenance. I said, okay. And then I said, and I have liver disease. And we'll need a transplant. And he said, then we will do it together. I knew he was a keeper then. And I couldn't have made it. In fact, we were newlyweds when I had my transplant. And let me tell you guys, if you look at my pictures, it's not pretty. It's nasty. And, excuse me, I will tell you that the medicines that we take, which are many, actually gives us dry mouth. So, he saw the good, the bad, and the ugly. My liver came from a 73-year-old lady. And of course, people say, oh golly, that's so, how old is your liver? But a liver is one of those things that regenerates. It's the only organ that does. And my mind, the way it works, I'm thinking, yeah, well, let's see, she's 73, so when she grew up, probably there weren't a lot of drugs. Probably she wasn't a big drinker, so, hey, I think I got a pretty good one. But anyway, when you're dying, one that will even buy you time, isn't that better than the alternative? But I hear that all the time. That's one of the questions that we get, or the comments we get. Oh, I'm too old. Nobody wants these old organs. Let the professionals make that choice. And I don't know, but I'm looking at a pretty darn good looking group here today. And I would say you have some really good stuff to share. But seriously, folks, there's no excuse for 22 people to die every day. I was one of the, I don't call it luck, I wasn't lucky, I was blessed. And like I said, God had worked for me to do. And I believe that was to use my voice and to talk to groups such as yourselves and to try to tell them, please, don't let someone die when you could have possibly saved their lives. We don't know when. We may go to the doctor and they say, this number's not looking good. Let's see what's going on. Or just like locally, a young man, and I'm sure you all heard this in the news, a young football player last year that all of a sudden needs a heart transplant. I've known the child since he was born. Very healthy. Nothing wrong with his heart. But he ended up having a virus that attacked his heart. And he was on the transplant list, and I was really worried. Knowing the statistics and knowing a heart's one of the hard ones, guys, to get. But Wade was blessed to receive that heart. And he's out at Spring Valley this year on that football team. We run into, and especially locally, when I go to places, and even, your doctors don't know everything, by the way. Trust me, nurses are better. But they'll look at me and they'll say, you had a transplant? Really? Don't you see healthy people that have had transplants? They don't get it. They don't understand. A lot of people think, well, they get a transplant and it's going to buy them some time, but they're going to be sick. And no, guys, we've got a life. We've got a busy life. Well, speak with Coda a lot. I enjoy traveling, and we've become very good friends through it. We're kind of the terrible twosome, trust me. We get two joys together, come on, Mom. So, but also, I'm very, in my church, I've been very busy in my church, and I was a cubby leader, if you're familiar with the little Awanas, and I was cubby leader for 21 years, until it got a little bit difficult getting them down out of the floor. And then I'm very involved in women's clubs. And I actually hold a state position and a district position. I'm the president-elect of the district. And in my local club, which is Pea Ridge, we are a volunteer organization. And that's what we do, is to help others. That takes energy, it takes time. So no, we don't sit in a rocking chair or lay in bed and just limp along with this new organ we have. We get out and live. We think every day of our donor, of that unselfish person that gave their life. You know, accidents happen. It is one thing mentally we did have to get by. We had to understand. The accident was going to happen. This person was going to die. Isn't it magnificent that God allowed man the knowledge to be able to save someone else through the procedures of organ and transplants? That was his plan. He has a plan. His plan for me was, let's get her patched up, let's get her back out there, let's get her talking to people, and try to tell them and explain to them and get them to be believers that everyone needs to sign on that dotted line. Like Joy said, you're only going to have a 1% to 2% chance of being a donor. But isn't it a wonderful thing? Anyone have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
How long did it take from the time they started your procedure to your procedure was totally complete?
Are you-
Transplant, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, in surgery?
Yes.
Okay, guys, I wasn't one of your typical, and because it usually takes 8 to 12 hours for a transplant. And mine totally took maybe 6. But I had fighting in me. And this was 15 years ago. Things have gotten a lot better since I had my transplant. And people do get out of the hospital sooner. But when I went to Pittsburgh, I was told that I would be in the hospital probably around 3 weeks. And then I needed to stay in the area about 6 weeks. Well, I had my transplant on a Monday. I got out of ICU on Wednesday because they just weren't rid of it. I wrote notes in ICU. I asked for a pencil. I was on a ventilator, so I couldn't talk. So I showed them I wanted pencil and paper, and I had written a note, if you would take this thing out, I could breathe. I wanted a television, I wanted my glasses, I wanted, and so like I said, on Monday I had my transplant. I got out of, oh yes, and I'd start, because I had tubes here and tubes here and tubes here. I had a big swan here, and I'd start. I need to take this out. Get rid of this. So I was just bugging them to death. When I got out of ICU on Wednesday, I made them take the catheter out. And that night, I still had a lot of tubes, but I got up with my pole and took myself to the bathroom. I didn't need any nurse. So I got out of the hospital. Well, in fact, I got out of ICU on Wednesday, and my son took me down to the beauty shop on Thursday and had my hair done. He knows his mother well.
She said high maintenance.
My coordinator, I'm sorry.
I said, were you very sore? When you said you cut your hair down, I'm thinking, whoa.
Yeah. I was cut from here to here, from here to here. I won't bear it all today. I used to. My kids have kind of gotten me out of that. I used to. Well, see, I had a liver transplant. Look at this. And even when I came home from the hospital, I had a T-tube. And that was because you had a bag that the bile, I mean, it's not pretty bad, but, and which had to be drained and all. But anyway, I was sore. And when they sent me home, because they say a lot of times that there's not a lot of pain after they cut all the muscles and the nerves, hey, they're wrong. Plus, I'm a redhead. Now, anyone notice that, by the way? I don't know whether you know about gingers or not. We're very difficult to get to sleep. We're very difficult to get the pain under control. We just, I don't know, our bodies fight it off. So when they sent me home to I had to go to the hotel for 3 weeks. They gave me 5 milligrams of oxycodone every 6 hours. And that was nothing. And I had to go back to the clinic on Monday. And I told the doctor, I said, if I had known last Monday what I know today, I wouldn't have a transplant. She said, but you'd be dead. And I said, sometimes there's things far worse than death. And she said, there must be a problem. What can I do for you? I said, you better give me some pain meds. And they did at that time. But yeah, it was very difficult to get the pain. And the streets in Pittsburgh, I have a lot of brick streets. And trying to get, when I had to go to the clinic and everything, it was a rough ride. But, and it took a year. It took a year to fully recover. And because they have to get your medicines, they call it a cocktail, and they have to get your medicines exactly the formula you need to keep you where you have no immune system. I'm immune suppressed, which I've learned to live with that. I mean, we have our little deals that we live with, but it is our
You
norm.
live.
But I live, and that is my norm. I mean, it's silly little things, like, I don't go to restaurants with buffets. That's a no-no. I have certain things that I'm not supposed to eat, sushi, or anything where possibly bacteria would grow in. I can't be around anybody that has had a live vaccine, like children at 1, they get their shots. I have to stay away for a little while. I can't take the shingles vaccine, the live one. They have a new one now, but we don't know yet. But the old shingles vaccine, I can't even be around anyone close for a while. And they told my husband if he got that vaccine, he'd have to move out for 6 weeks. I really encouraged him. But we have our little problems, but I'm active. I've seen the birth of a grandson who's now 13. I have a granddaughter that sang here just a week ago in the Capitol Midland Show Choir. If any of you saw that performance, she was the one with the ukulele and had a solo. I have a grandson that's going to Ohio State that spent 5 years in the Navy as a nuke, and we were able to go to Japan to visit him. I've got to travel to Hawaii. My husband, of course, this was right after transplant. He may not have thought I was going to make it. So he promised me, on your first anniversary, I'll take you anywhere you want to go. Hawaii. So, and we did. We've been able to travel. I've seen grandkids graduate. I've seen them play sports. I've seen them sing in church. I've seen them participate in so much and still doing that. I wouldn't have been able to do that.
Prior to your diagnosis, well, once you got your diagnosis, did the doctors try to put you on any kind of a medication or anything like this, or was it to the point that they just said, hey, there's nothing that we can do?
No, I was on a medication called Ursodiol, if you're familiar with Ursodiol.
I'm not familiar with it.
And it was, it's a biofilm. But they give it a lot of times, it's a medicine that will, they give it for gallstones, because it will break up gallstones. And then also, they found out that it will help. It was Actigol. It used to be called Actigol, but then the generic, it's Ursodiol. So I was on that for like 10 years. And then when the symptoms started, which fatigue, and I was so dark, I was so yellow that I glowed. And the worst thing was the itching. There is no pain, because I've had a lot of pain. There is no pain like itching, because you itch inside and out, places you can't reach. They gave me everything they could to try to calm down the itching. I took Cetaphil and put peppermint oil in it and would lather up. I would turn the hot water on scalding and hold my hands under it and wring my hands. I didn't care if my skin came off. The hot water burned. But it was better than the itching. And when the itching was gone immediately, when that liver started to work. And of course, I'm blind as a bat. But also, I would get up every morning and I would get real close to the mirror and I could see the yellow begin to fade. And my eyes getting whiter. They were highlighted yellow. My friend Nadra that's with me, she knows. And there's some of those pictures I still look kind of that color. was gone so quickly. And I didn't understand what it was like to feel good. I didn't know I could feel that good. I didn't realize how sick I was and how bad I felt until I felt good again. On my first anniversary, and I believe you all were listening to the question, on my first anniversary, I went rollerblading with my grandkids.
Good for you.
Yes, Lord.
I was wondering if you could tell them how long you were on the waiting list and what that indicated.
And that was unusual. Of course, because that has to do with your blood type. And being a liver recipient, and they have different ways that they rate you for each organ when they put you on a list. But they have with a liver a MELD score. And they add up a lot of different things, which is your blood work and different things. I think your age comes into it. And they give you a score. And usually you'll go on a transplant list at about 14. And when I went to Pittsburgh for my evaluation, mine was 27. So, and they called me because they have a committee that meets together and decides whether they want to list you or not. And they called me, and she said, "You're first on the list." And I thought, I always want to be first in something. I didn't necessarily want to be first on the transplant list. But I thought then, oh golly, how many's on this list? You know, maybe 5, 6. And I said, well, how many's on the list? She said, about 200. So, and I was on the list for 19 days. 19 days. I have friends that have been listed for years. But there are rare blood types. I'm A positive. And the quicker you get it, then the better you can heal, the better you can recover, and the better the outcome. So I was blessed, because I wouldn't have made it much longer.
Did you move up to Pittsburgh to wait for the transplant when they put you number 1?
No, because they told me that if I got up there in, well, they gave me a 6-hour window, and there's a different window for each organ also, as to how much time you have before, because there's a shelf life on organs, and how long that you have. And they had called me on a Friday evening, and they said, we have a liver for you. And my mother was in hospital, and I knew she was dying. And, but I had to go. So I called this friend of mine that had an airplane. He was supposed to fly me out. So we get up in the air, and we're halfway there, and I get this call. The liver's no good. So we turned around, and we come home. And then on Sunday, and it was snowing, and I get another call, because most of the calls come on weekends, because there's more accidents on weekends. And so I get another call, they have a liver for me again. So I called David, and he said, Joy, I can't fly. I don't have any de-icer for the wings, because the weather was really bad. Because that was February the 20th, because my transplant was on February 21st. So my husband said, call them, ask how long we have to get there. And I said, well, maybe I'm not supposed to go, because Mother's died. He said, it may be your last chance. So I called, and we flew up there. We were hoping, we had flashers on and everything. We wanted to get stopped. Because we thought, score, give us some help. And actually, which we'd made the trip many times, but we were a little excited. Scared? Nah. Nervous? No, just excited. And because I knew God was taking care of me, and we were singing and praising the Lord all the way up there. But we get up there, and it was like, okay, exactly how is it I get to, because I would go to Mount Fear. that was the hospital where the clinic was. But UPMC, which they're all connected together, I had to go to that ER. So we didn't want to waste time trying to find it. So there was a taxi cab driver. My husband pulls over, hands him a couple 20s and says, take us to the emergency room at UPMC. So he did, and we got there. And they started prepping me immediately. And it was during the night that they started then, and like I say, my husband, hey, I was asleep. You know, I didn't know what was going on, and I really feel for what my husband went through. Because at the same time, they were doing another liver transplant. It was a gentleman. He didn't make it. And my husband was with his wife in the waiting room. So you can imagine what he was going through. But I tell you, he looked terrible when I saw him. Golly, that's what they did. And I remember, which I'm left-handed, but I remember raising my right hand to him. Just a few more days. Anything else? I've taken up so much of your time as it is, but if you get a chance, I'd love for you to see my X-rated pictures. Thank you all so much.
Well, it's hard to follow the comedian transplant.
Compare notes.
To follow up on a couple of things that she mentioned her immune system was somewhat suppressed. Each transplant recipient has to take immunosuppressive medicines to keep the transplant, the life-saving organ, from being seen by the body as an invader. So that those medicines do suppress the immune system some. So she has to stay away, as she mentioned, from kids who had the live flu myths. And just be really careful. One thing she also did mention, transplant recipients can't eat grapefruit because that interferes with something about grapefruit and maybe pomegranate as well, right?
Pomegranates, yeah.
They interfere with the workings of the anti-rejection medications. So there's certain little things they have to be careful about. I wanted to mention that when a person goes on the waiting list, all their data that they've had done at the transplant center where they've registered goes to UNOS, which stands for the United Network for Organ Sharing, which is based in Richmond, Virginia. And they have this giant database with all the information about all the more than 113,000 people on the waiting list. And so when my clinical colleagues at CODA, work in a hospital situation where someone has died of brain death and they can't come back from their injuries, but they're either on the donor registry or their family's granted consent for them to be a donor after they died. My clinical colleagues work with UNOS to figure out who the organs best match with. And when they do that, they look at blood typing, tissue typing. There are 6 things about each of our tissues that make you different from someone else, so they look for a best match with that. They look at body type and size, meaning that a child who may have sadly died and was an organ donor, that child's liver couldn't go into an adult, and vice versa. It just wouldn't work by body type and size. They look at how sick the person is, how long they've been on the transplant list. The fact that she, rose to the top of the list immediately and only waited 19 days on the list means she was very, very sick and near death. But they also look in terms of each organ and how long each organ can last. The heart and lungs have to be transplanted within 10 to 12 hours from the time of the donation surgery at the hospital, for example, at Cabell Huntington. The heart and lungs has to get to someone within 10 to 12 hours or the organ just won't be usable anymore to save that person's life. On the other hand, the kidneys are the endurance champions of the organs. They can last for up to 48 hours in a cooled state. So when I first started with CODA, I was told about this man who sadly died down in Harlan County, Kentucky, and he was able to be an organ donor, and his kidney matched with a young woman in Hawaii. And his kidney was flown all the way to Hawaii in a cooled state and made that long trip and was able to be warmed up, and she was able to have a successful surgery and regained her health and was able to go about her life, just as she had planned and hoped for. So that was just an example of the big differences between the heart, for example, heart and lungs, and then the kidneys. So those are just some of the things that from a medical standpoint, we look at. This thing's probably gone to sleep after 45 minutes. no, come on.
Transplant.
This happened the last time too.
Okay.
See if I can figure it
Can
out.
Could I ask a question?
We'll give her a minute to fix it, then I'll wing it, yes.
If someone has, and maybe many of us have, has had chemo, I know you can't give blood for quite a while. In fact, they don't even send me the notice anymore. But does that affect whether you could be a donor or not?
Well, typically a person who's had cancer, they typically need to be 5 years out to be considered with the potential for an organ donor. And a lot of times people will try to, based on what the blood donor centers say about giving blood, people will try to extrapolate that to mean, oh, I can't be a tissue donor, I can't be an organ donor. But the truth is, anybody of any age or any health condition can join a registry. And it would just depend on when they passed, whether they passed in that particular way, and also the health professionals would speak with the family and do a health history and figure out all those particulars and figure out if it was even possible for them to be an organ donor.
I know, when my husband died, he was an organ donor, and I got on the phone with you all,
Uh-huh,
and there was a lot of questions.
right,
Probably was on the phone with them for about 45 minutes.
yeah. Yeah, they do a
Answering
medical history
everything.
and a social history, and the whole idea is to, learn as much as possible about this person who could possibly be an organ donor and save lives, but also looking out for the health of the recipient.
Sure.
Because they don't want to, for example, a person who's died of an infection or AIDS or, just anything that could be of an issue to the recipient would be ruled out.
Yeah, and then they tell you what they think they could do.
Right, right.
It's very intense.
So these are the 8 life-saving organs that can be transplanted. All these organs, except the small bowel, can be transplanted at the transplant centers in Kentucky and most full transplant centers. The small bowel, which is part of the digestive system, is more of the numbers on needing that type of transplant are less. So there's some specialty transplant centers across the country that a person with that need may have to work with. So there's a slightly higher percentage of people that can be tissue donors. Say a person was a registered organ and tissue donor but died at home of a heart attack. That person definitely would not be able to be an organ donor because he or she died at home and was not on a ventilator, did not die of brain death. But that person could potentially be a tissue donor. So, my clinical colleagues from Louisville and Lexington, if working with the hospitals here in Huntington, would call and speak with the family. So these types of transplants can be life-enhancing. I have a couple of hopefully illustrating stories about some of them. The tendons are part of the connective tissue, ligaments and tendons. And if any of you all are football fans, you may have heard of Carson Palmer. He used to play with the Bengals and then I think moved on to a football, Arizona Cardinals maybe. But when he was with the Bengals, he had a really bad knee injury and had to have major surgery to be able to walk again, much less run and play football. And his mobility was secured again during his surgery with the use of an Achilles tendon that was donated from a female donor who was killed by a drunk driver down in Texas. And her Achilles tendon, which is that strong tendon that runs up from your heel, was used to repair his knee and gave him the ability to walk and run again. The Bengals also were affected by donation on the other side, in which one of their players, Chris Henry, died in a automobile situation, and he suffered a head injury, and he died and was able to be an organ donor and save 5 lives. There was a video that was shown on ESPN back then where his mother, Carolyn Henry Glaspie, met all 5 of his recipients, and it was a very moving video. She had one of those big blankets that you can put photos on, and she had a photo of Chris, and there was a picture with all the recipients around him and her, so it was a moving thing. So those are just some examples of these are the types of tissues. Heart valves often need to be used with an infant or a toddler who may have a cardiac defect and needs surgery to have that replaced. Saphenous veins can be used in heart bypass surgery. With the corneas are part of our eyesight, obviously. They're like a contact lens on the front part of the eye. And if someone's corneas aren't working well, the person could be blind or nearly blind due to corneal disease. So having a cornea transplant can suddenly give someone the ability to see their loved ones again, to see the colors of the world. When I first started at CODA, I was told about this young woman in West Virginia who was traveling as a passenger in a car. She was blind, and she obviously didn't have her driver's license, but she had a state ID. And on that state ID, she had joined West Virginia's donor registry. And as the story goes, there was an accident and the young woman died sadly, but she was able to be a tissue donor and also be a cornea donor and give others two people the ability to see again. When I heard the story, I was like really puzzled. I was thinking, how can a person who was blind give two people the ability to see? And it turns out her blindness was caused by damage to her optic nerves, but her corneas were perfectly fine. So once they did the medical and social history with her family and figured out all the particulars about her medical situation, they knew that she could give someone else the ability to see. So I thought that was a wonderful outcome with tissue donation. Also with skin donation is like the very top layer of skin. It's always taken from the back side of the body, and that can actually be life-saving in cases where a person has, like a firefighter, for example, or someone who's caught in a major home fire, a blast or something that has major third-degree burns. That skin donation can be life-saving and help that person to survive their injuries, because it can help new skin grow more quickly underneath and can reduce the pain from that burn by up to 60%. Back in April, we had a Donate Life Summit with CODA in Lexington, and we had a man named Jason who had been a police officer in Arizona, and he was on the job in his police car. He had on his bulletproof vest, and out of the blue, a car comes up behind him going at an out-of-control speed. There was a person was in that car who had an epileptic seizure, and the person hit his car going incredibly fast. The gas tank exploded, so he was caught in a fire in his police car. So this part of his body was not that injured, but his face and neck was incredibly burned. So he had multiple surgeries involving skin donation, and he actually came and spoke to us at our summit, and was just so inspiring about his life being saved due to tissue donation, with skin donation. Okay, so the impact of one donor: 8 lives can be saved by an organ donor if potentially all the life-saving organs could be donated. That's pretty rare for a person to be a 7 or 8 organ donor. There's usually something that's happened in the course of what caused the person to die in the first place that's caused one of those, at least some of those organs to be negatively impacted. Or perhaps somebody who has diabetes, for example, and who could be an organ donor, they might not be able to donate their kidneys, but they might be able to donate other organs. So it's all assessed by health professionals at the time if that person's able to donate. And with tissue donation, up to 50 lives can be enhanced by one person being a tissue donor. So that's pretty amazing. With tissue donation, all tissue that's donated is processed and sterilized and working with tissue banks and made perfectly safe for the recipients.
How long of a lifespan does tissue have? I mean, is there a lifespan to it, or is this something that's got to be done like?
It's processed and has a much long, yeah. So, yes.
I was just wondering, with tissue, is bone marrow also something that can be transplanted in this way? I mean, I know that there are bone marrow transplants that are typically from, a matched living donor, but is that something that can also be harvested in this case, or no?
Apparently, organ procurement organizations don't deal with bone marrow, and from what I can understand, there's something about it where it has to be from a living person to be able to be effective. So that seems to be why there's bone marrow registries where somebody can sign up and be a potential donor for someone who needs that. Okay, so working together, we can all do things to save more lives with transplantation. Just in your daily life, I encourage you to encourage others to learn the facts about organ donation and tissue transplantation, just as you've done today. The brochure that should be at your seat contains all the facts and more that we presented here today. So, I encourage people to, just share the facts with others. If you hear them saying something that doesn't sound right, just encourage them to go on CODA's website or do some research and try to learn the the facts about it. Education can obviously help increase the number of people who understand the importance of donation and who join a registry as a potential donor. So at this point, I'll get a little bit into some of the myths and misunderstandings that are out there, and we'll be finishing up pretty soon. One thing that happens is that shows like Grey's Anatomy and Chicago Med and all those kind of interesting law and medical shows on TV, they'll take the topic of organ donation and sometimes tissue donation and weave it into their scripts in a very fascinating, intriguing way, but they sometimes don't bother with the facts about how it's done in real life. So people sometimes make the mistake of believing what they see on TV and in movies, and every time there's something on Grey's Anatomy that's false, we're all like, oh no, now we have to try to backpedal and fix this problem. But so there's just a lot of, you may, after hearing more about this topic today, you may notice it more in the entertainment that you see, and it's not always factual. So one myth has to do with the driver's license. There's a persistent myth out there, and it's particularly prevalent in parts of Appalachia, where people believe that if you have any indicator on your driver's license that you've joined a donor registry as a potential donor to help others after you pass, that you won't get the health care you need if you